Garrett Lemaire did not laugh quietly. He laughed the way men laugh when they have never once been told no, full-throated, with his chin tilted up and his teeth showing, the kind of laugh that fills a room and dares anyone inside it to disagree. The man standing across from him did not react. He simply waited. His name was Russell Holt, and he had driven 4 hours from Sudbury to Calgary in a truck that smelled like engine oil and the particular kind of coffee that gets made at 5 in the morning when a man has to be somewhere important and does not want to be late. He had a folder in his left hand. He had not dressed up exactly, but he had dressed deliberately. Clean work shirt, collar pressed, boots without mud on them. His daughter had noticed when he came downstairs. She was 8 years old, and she said, "You look like you're going to win something, Dad." He had kissed the top of her head and told her to eat her toast. That was the last easy moment of the day. The building that housed Lemaire Industrial Contracting sat at the edge of Calgary's industrial district, glass-fronted in a way that seemed designed to remind visitors that the people inside could see them coming from a long way off. Russell had been here once before, 3 years ago, when the contract was new and the handshakes were still firm and everyone was still pretending this was going to be a partnership. That version of the building felt different. Or maybe that version of Russell did. He told the woman at the front desk his name and said he had documentation to submit regarding the Callaway Ridge inspection report. She typed something. She did not look up right away. "Mr. Lemaire isn't expecting anyone," she said. "He doesn't need to be expecting me," Russell said. "I'm not here to meet with him. I'm here to file the documents under the review agreement dated March of last year. Section 4, Clause 7. There's a submission deadline of the 15th. Today is the 13th. She looked at him then. Not unkindly, but in the way people look at someone who has just said something technically correct in a situation that is about to become uncomfortable. "I'll need to let someone know," she said. "That's fine," Russell said. "I'll wait." He waited 22 minutes. He counted them because he had learned, over the years, that the exact number matters when you are the kind of man people try to make disappear by making you wait long enough that you give up and go home. He did not give up. He did not check his phone. He stood near the front desk with the folder in his hand, and he waited, and when the elevator opened and the man in the gray suit came out walking fast and looking like he had already decided how this was going to go, Russell turned to face him and was ready. The man's name was Aldous Crane. He was not Garrett Lemaire, but he was the kind of person Garrett Lemaire sent to deal with things he did not want to deal with personally. Smooth, brisk, carrying the particular energy of someone who has been handed small powers and has mistaken them for large ones. "Mr. Holt," Aldous Crane said, without extending his hand. "I understand you have some materials you'd like to leave with us." "I'd like them received and logged," Russell said, "under the existing review agreement, with a time-stamped acknowledgement of receipt." Something shifted slightly in Aldous Crane's expression. "That's a very specific request. It's the request I'm entitled to make," Russell said. "The clause is written into the agreement. I have a copy with me if there's any confusion." There was a pause, the kind of pause that exists because a man is recalibrating. "I'll need to verify that with legal," Aldous Crane said. "Of course," Russell said. "I'll wait." He waited 11 more minutes. The elevator opened again. This time it was Garrett Lemaire himself. Russell had seen him before. But the version of Garrett Lemaire who stepped into that lobby looked like a man who had been interrupted from something more important and had not fully finished being annoyed about it. He was taller than Russell remembered, or maybe he just carried himself that way. Shoulders back, jaw set, wearing a suit that cost more than Russell's truck. He had the graying temples of a man who wanted you to know he had been in the game a long time. He looked at Russell the way men like him look at tradespeople in professional settings, not with hostility exactly, more with a kind of fundamental surprise, as though he had not expected the problem to have a face. "Russell Holt," Garrett Lemaire said. "Not a question, a categorization." "Mr. Lemaire," Russell said. You came all this way to drop off paperwork. I came all this way to file a mandatory inspection report and receive written confirmation that it was received. Yes. Garrett Lemaire looked at the folder. He looked at Russell. Something moved behind his eyes that Russell could not name exactly, but had seen before. The calculation of a man deciding whether someone is worth the effort of being handled, or whether they can simply be dismissed. He chose dismissal. "Lawson," he said to someone near the desk, without looking away from Russell. "Call security. Mr. Holt is on private property without an appointment." Russell did not move. "I'm on private property to conduct a filing I'm legally entitled to conduct," he said. "The appointment isn't required under the clause. The document submission is. That's for our lawyers to determine," Garrett Lemaire said. "Right now you're trespassing." "I'm not trespassing. I have the agreement in my hand." Garrett Lemaire smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has decided that the fastest way to end a conversation is to make the other person disappear, and who has the resources to do exactly that. Two security guards appeared from somewhere. Russell had not noticed the door they came from. They were professional about it, which almost made it worse. No roughness, no aggression, just the quiet institutional force of people doing a job that happens to involve removing a man from a lobby in front of approximately 15 witnesses who had all found reasons to be very interested in their phones. Russell placed the folder on the reception desk. He placed it face up, documents clearly visible, alongside his trade license, his inspection credentials, and the copy of the agreement with the relevant clause underlined in blue ink. He did not say anything dramatic. He did not need to. Then he allowed himself to be walked toward the door. Behind him, Garrett Lemaire laughed. Not under his breath. Not quietly. He laughed the way men laugh when they believe, fully, that the thing in front of them is not a threat but a minor inconvenience that has just been solved. "Call anyone you want," Garrett Lemaire said. "I built half this city." Russell stepped through the door and into the January cold. The wind off the foothills hit him square in the face. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and he thought about his daughter and the way she had said, "You look like you're going to win something, Dad," and he thought, "Not yet." But the day isn't over. He drove to the nearest Tim Hortons and sat in a corner booth with a medium coffee and his phone, and he made 3 calls. The first was to a woman named Josephine Tran, who was a senior compliance officer at the Alberta Occupational Safety Board. Russell had submitted a parallel copy of the Callaway Ridge inspection report to her office 11 days earlier, which meant that the regulatory clock had already started. The refusal to accept his documents at Lemaire Industrial did not stop the process. It only created a documented gap in Lemaire's compliance record, a gap that now had a timestamp, 2 security witnesses, and a lobby full of bystanders. Josephine Tran said, "Did they refuse official receipt?" Russell said, "They had me removed from the building." There was a pause on the line. "Okay," she said. "Give me until end of day." The second call was to a man named Douglas Ossie, who was a senior lending officer at the bank that held the construction financing for the Callaway Ridge development. Russell had worked on that site for 14 months. He knew what was under the concrete on the southeast foundation wall. He had written it down in his report. He had written it down carefully, with measurements and photographs, because he had understood even then that the day might come when the writing down was the only thing that protected anyone. Douglas Ossie did not say much. He asked 2 questions. He said he would need to pull the file. He said he would call back. The third call was to his daughter's school to let them know he would be picking her up himself at the end of the day instead of the usual arrangement with his neighbor. He did not have a reason for this. He just wanted to be the one to pick her up. He drove back to the motel near the Deerfoot, and he sat on the edge of the bed and he looked at his hands for a while. A mechanic's hands. A father's hands. Hands that had rebuilt transmissions and changed diapers and held his wife's hand in the hospital in the last weeks, when the cancer had taken everything from her except the particular stubborn warmth she had always had. and she had used it to tell him not to be afraid, and he had tried very hard to do what she asked. Her name had been Margot. She had been 41 when she died. Their daughter, whose name was Tess, had been 5. Tess did not remember much about her mother now, but she had her mother's way of looking at things directly, without flinching, and Russell thought about that sometimes when the world tried to make him look away. He had not come to Calgary to start a fight. He had come to file a report about a structural defect in the foundation of a residential development that, if left unaddressed, had the potential to cause serious harm to anyone living in those units. That was it. That was the whole of it. He was a certified building inspector with a clean record and 15 years of experience, and he had found something wrong, and he had written it down, and he had tried to hand it to the people who needed to receive it. And Garrett Lemaire had laughed. Douglas Ossie called back at 3:30. He said, "The report you submitted to our office in November, the photographs in Section 6, can you confirm those are unaltered originals?" Russell said he could. Douglas Ossie said, "We're going to need you to come in tomorrow morning." The tone of his voice had changed, not dramatically, but in the way the tone of a room changes when someone opens a window. Something had shifted, and the shift was moving towards something Russell could not yet see, but had started to feel. He said he would be there at 9. He picked up Tess at 3:40. She came out of the school carrying her backpack sideways, like she always did, one strap dragging, her hair escaping from the braid Russell had put in that morning with the particular ineptitude of a man who has learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials and parental necessity. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too big for her because he had bought it with room to grow, and she ran the last few steps to the truck because she always ran, even when she was tired, even when there was no urgency. She just moved toward things the way her mother had. "How'd it go?" she said, climbing in. "Fine," Russell said. "I have to go back tomorrow." She thought about this. "I left them on the desk," Russell said. She nodded, very seriously. "That counts," she said. He looked at her for a moment. 8 years old, backpack falling off one shoulder, completely certain. "Yeah," he said. "That counts." The meeting at the bank the next morning lasted 2.5 hours. There were 4 people in the room. Douglas Ossie, a woman from the bank's risk management division named Patricia Ching, a representative from the city's building authority whose name Russell did not catch immediately, but who wore the expression of a person who has not slept well, and Russell. They went through the report page by page. They went through the photographs. They asked about the southeast foundation wall, the cracking pattern, the moisture intrusion, the evidence of the drainage failure during the spring thaw that the site supervisor had attributed to normal settling and that Russell had attributed to a design deviation from the original engineering drawings. They asked whether he had raised this with the site supervisor at the time. He had. They asked whether it had been addressed. It had not. They asked whether he had documented the non-response. He had. Patricia Chung said, "When you filed the report in November, did Lemaire Industrial acknowledge receipt at that time?" Russell said, "They told me the report had been received and was under review. I have the email." The city building authority representative, whose name turned out to be Ray Fontaine, put down his pen. "What did you say their review timeline was?" "They gave themselves 60 days, Russell said. "That expired in January. Yesterday was my attempt to file the follow-up compliance notice and receive acknowledgement. They refused receipt and had me removed." Ray Fontaine looked at Douglas Ossie. Douglas Ossie looked at Patricia Chung. The 3 of them had a conversation in the particular silent language of people who have just arrived at the same conclusion from slightly different angles. "Mr. Holt," Ray Fontaine said, "I'm going to need to make a call before we continue." He stepped out of the room. He was gone for 9 minutes. Russell knows because he counted. What happened in the weeks that followed was not dramatic in the way that television makes these things dramatic. There was no single confrontation. There was no scene with flashing lights and handcuffs in a lobby. The machinery that Garrett Lemaire had spent 3 decades building did not collapse in a day. It collapsed the way structures collapse when the foundation has been compromised, slowly and then all at once, and in ways that cannot be undone. The city issued a stop work order on the Callaway Ridge development 4 days after the bank meeting. The order cited the structural deficiencies in Russell's report as the basis for the hold, and it named November as the date on which the deficiencies had been first documented and submitted for review, which meant that Lemaire Industrial had been on notice for 60 days, had failed to remediate, and had then refused official receipt of the follow-up notice. The bank suspended disbursement of the construction financing pending independent structural assessment. The independent assessment confirmed Russell's findings and added 3 additional concerns that the original report had flagged as potential, but which the assessors now classified as probable. The contractors working the site, many of whom had been quietly worried about the foundation for months and had not known what to do with their worry, started talking to each other. And then some of them started talking to a reporter at the Calgary Herald, named Simone Park, who had been covering the Callaway Ridge development for different reasons entirely, but who understood immediately that the story she had thought she was writing was not the actual story. Garrett Lemaire's lawyers sent letters. The letters were answered. Garrett Lemaire issued a statement saying that the concerns were being taken seriously and that Lemaire Industrial had a long history of prioritizing safety. The statement did not explain why the certified inspector who had first identified the concerns had been removed from the building by security. Simone Park asked about that specifically. The statement did not address it. Russell was not in Calgary for most of this. He drove back to Sudbury 2 days after the bank meeting, because Tess had a science fair project due and because his shop had a vintage Chevy Camaro in the bay that needed its timing chain replaced, and the owner was a retired teacher named Abe who brought coffee every Friday and asked about Tess's spelling tests. Russell's life did not stop because a building company in Calgary was beginning to understand the cost of laughing at the wrong man. He got calls. He answered them. He provided documents when documents were requested. He made himself available to the city and to the compliance board, and, once, to a lawyer who was representing 3 families who had already taken possession of units in the completed section of Callaway Ridge, and who wanted to understand what exactly they were living in. He was honest with all of them. He had always been honest. That was the thing Garrett Lemaire had not understood. The thing men like Garrett Lemaire almost never understand, which is that the documentation of an honest man is a kind of architecture. It takes a long time to build. It is quiet and unglamorous, and nobody congratulates you for doing it. But when something tries to knock it over, it does not knock. The formal charges came in the spring. Russell was in the shop when Josephine Tran called to tell him. 3 counts of regulatory non-compliance under the Alberta Safety Codes Act, 2 counts of construction fraud related to the filing records, and 1 charge related to the deliberate obstruction of a compliance inspector's right of submission. A charge that Ray Fontaine had apparently advocated for specifically, citing the security footage from the lobby. "There's footage," Russell said. "There's footage," Josephine Tran said. "Your folder is on the desk, clear as anything." He thought about that for a moment. He thought about setting the folder down face up, the credentials beside it, the clause underlined in blue. He had not done that for the camera. He had not known there was a camera. He had done it because that was who he was, and because he had learned from his wife that the way you do things when no one is watching is the only reliable measure of who you actually are. He thanked Josephine Tran. He hung up. He stood in the bay next to Abe's Camaro and looked at the engine for a while, and he felt, quietly and without fanfare, the particular satisfaction of a thing having been set right. Garrett Lemaire did not go to jail that spring. The legal process was long, and lawyers are expensive for a reason, and the story of how it ended is the story of many months and many filings, and eventually a settlement that was described in the press as significant, which is the word used when the number is large enough to matter and small enough that no one has to admit the full scale of what went wrong. What happened to Garrett Lemaire was not the kind of ending where a man is led away in handcuffs to cheering crowds. What happened was quieter and, in some ways, more complete. The Callaway Ridge development was placed under court-supervised remediation. The financing was restructured with new oversight conditions that effectively removed Garrett Lemaire from operational control. Two of his senior staff, in the process of cooperating with investigators, provided information that led to a separate inquiry into 3 other projects. The Herald ran 4 stories over 6 months. By the end, the name Lemaire Industrial no longer meant what it had meant at the beginning. Garrett Lemaire sold his house in Aspen Woods and moved somewhere quieter. His lawyers continued to bill him. His name became the kind of name that people in Calgary's construction industry mentioned as a warning. He did not call Russell Holt. He would not have known what to say. In June, Tess won 2nd place in her school's science fair with a project about how water pressure affects different types of building materials. She had chosen the topic herself. She had asked her father a lot of questions while she was putting it together, and he had answered them as simply and accurately as he could, and he had helped her mount her diagrams on the foam board with a level to make sure they were straight. The night before the fair, she had looked at the finished board and said, "Dad, can water really make a whole building fall down?" He thought about the southeast wall of Callaway Ridge. He thought about the cracking pattern and the moisture intrusion and the 60 days and the lobby. "If it gets in somewhere it's not supposed to," he said, "and nobody does anything about it, yeah, it can." She took this in with the direct, unflinching seriousness that she had inherited from her mother. "That's why you went to Calgary," she said. "That's why I went to Calgary," he said. She looked at her project board for another moment. Then she said, "Good thing you went then." He agreed that it was. He still drives past building sites sometimes, on jobs, and he still stops when something doesn't look right. He still writes things down. He still keeps copies of everything, filed in order, in the particular methodical way that his wife used to tease him about. "You could find a receipt from 2009 in under a minute, Russell. That's not normal," and that he has never been able to stop doing, because it turns out that the habit of careful record-keeping is not a quirk. It is, in certain situations, the most important thing a person can bring into a room. He drives the same truck. It still smells like engine oil. He still makes coffee at 5 in the morning when he has somewhere important to be, and Tess still notices when he is dressed deliberately, and she still says things that are simple and true in the way only children and very honest people can manage. He does not think of himself as someone who brought down an empire. He thinks of himself as someone who filed a report and waited and left his credentials on the desk where they could be seen. That was enough. It turned out that was exactly enough.